Hey, this is Jen, the Holistic Health Boss, your functional diagnostic practitioner and expert. And this week, I'm talking to you guys about mysterious mold in a multiple part series on the blog coming up that's starting today. And mold has been a big part of my health story, so I want to share all of my findings, the research that I've done with all of you, because mold might be more of a problem than we even think that it is. Mold is really mysterious. I know that you've seen it, maybe on your window sills or in between your tile grout. You probably have seen it on food that's been old and left in the fridge or that you've left out, as well as on your washing machine, especially if you have the front loading ones, and who knows where else in your home or in your workplace. And I know that the creeping question in the back of your mind is that mold toxic? Well, the truth is that not all mold is toxic. There's about 100,000 different species of mold, and traditionally people think that black mold is the toxic mold, and yes, some black mold is toxic, but I don't know about you, but any mold that I look at pretty much looks black for the most part to me. But color is not what dictates whether or not mold is toxic. So out of the over 100,000 different species, they come in all different colors and shapes and sizes, and any of those different species could be toxic. It doesn't matter what color it is, and you can't tell just by looking at it with the human eye whether or not the mold is toxic. Now, the World Health Organization, they came out with a report somewhat recently. They do this on a regular basis for guidelines on indoor air quality. And in that report, they portrayed that, or they had found through their research, that about 50% of US homes in the United States, have some type of dampness or mold. And dampness is described or defined as known water leakage or dampness bubbling under the floors or actual mold growth. So 50% of US homes have mold in it, and the question is, how toxic is that mold, and is it, playing a role in your health, essentially? Now, about 25 to 30% of the human population can be severely affected by mold. Based upon genetic predispositions to something that we call sick building syndrome, which is sick building syndrome, SBF, or chronic inflammatory response syndrome known as CIRS or CIRS. Now, these people that have a genetic predisposition to these type of sicknesses as a result of mold exposure, they get extremely sick. And again, this is about 25 to 30% of the population, and even within that, the severity of their sickness can vary. People who have really severe reactions to mold toxins, they will get sick within 15 minutes of being in a building or a room that's infested with mold. They'll have, maybe trouble breathing, like going to an asthma bout, or they'll break out in hives or rashes or get nauseous. So those people, and you could be one of those people if you get sick like that, but maybe you're not. And for me, I kind of fell somewhere in the middle. I didn't get severely sick from mold, but it definitely burdened my body and made me sick. So even for people who don't have that genetic predisposition, mold toxins can still pose a problem, because overall, especially over an extended period of time of exposure, they have a tendency to wear down our immune system, as well as burdening our liver and preventing us from excreting other toxins out of our body. Now, mold sickness can be dated all the way back to biblical times. It's actually referenced in the Old Testament of the Bible, known as the plague. However, in conventional medicine, doctors don't even want to acknowledge that mold sickness is an issue. And even sometimes with functional medicine doctors, they're not educated enough or well equipped to know how to actually handle mold toxicity. So oftentimes mold toxicity or mold sickness can go overlooked for lack of education or knowledge, as well as just the fact that a lot of the symptoms of mold toxicity actually cross over to other conditions, so it can be really hard to get a diagnosis. You're likely to get diagnosed with something else. Now, for me, mold totally plagued me. It did a number on my health. Mold created or caused or triggered estrogen dominance in my body because mold toxins can mimic estrogen in the body and create xenoestrogens, elevating estrogen levels. And then over time, because of how it weighed on my immune system plus the elevated estrogens, it actually triggered Hashimoto's for me. So I was originally diagnosed with Hashimoto's and estrogen dominance, and then going back and seeing my mold exposure, now that the mold has been removed, all of my conditions are getting better or have gone away completely. I'm no longer estrogen dominant and I'm in remission for Hashimoto's. Now, let's look at some of the other symptoms that can look like mold illness. So mold illness symptoms can also include things like aches, asthma, and sinus issues, especially if you have those things that happen more frequently or the severity is increased when it's damp or wet outside, like it's raining. Also difficulty concentrating, brain fog and dizziness, eye and throat irritation or flu-like symptoms, chronic fatigue, headaches, and mood swings, as well as rashes and weight gain, and night sweats. Also frequent urination, nauseous, weakness or tingling or numbness, and then hormone imbalances, irregularities with your menstrual cycle, and autoimmune disorders. I mean, that's a lot of different symptoms that look like a lot of other things, right? So this is how mold sickness can go often diagnosed. One of the signature symptoms of having maybe mold sickness is if you've been diagnosed with something like an autoimmune disorder or a chronic condition that doesn't get better with treatment. That might mean that you're being exposed to mold or something else that is continuing to contribute to that. Two other signature symptoms of mold toxicity is urinating frequently because your body is constantly trying to get rid of the toxins that are in it, and then also being electrically charged, meaning that you shock everything that you touch. I know that's a really random one, but that's something that doesn't really associate with other conditions and maybe something to look for. Now, before you go, spending a ton of money on mold testing or raising a ruckus at work about maybe mold exposure, what I want to share with you guys today are some cheap and easy ways to start investigating whether or not you're being exposed to mold and how it's playing a role in your health before you go down the rabbit hole of spending a ton of money. So this is part one, all about the testing aspects to look at mold in your environment as well as in your body. So the first really cheap and easy test that you can do is something called a visual contrast sensitivity screening. And you can do this at survivingmold.com. It's about $15 to do this screening. And mold toxins, well, basically, they can affect your neurological function and then in turn your vision and how you see contrast between colors. So this screening is something that you can actually do online. It takes just a few quick minutes and it costs you about $15. So it's maybe a way to get some insights on whether or not mold is toxic to you or you're being exposed to it, and then also a way to measure your progress if you start any mold treatment. Now, this test is not all-inclusive, and none of the tests that I'm going to talk about today are all-inclusive to be a definite indicator. You need to do a series of maybe testing to get multiple indicating factors on whether or not mold is an issue for you. So, for example, for me, on the visual contrast screening test, I actually tested negative for that, but I've known other people who have tested positive. But again, it's a cheap and easy way to maybe take the first step in doing some testing. Now, the other type of test that you can do is called an ERMI or a HERTSMI test, and you can do these through mycometrics.com, and again, the links are going to be back in the blog or the email that you can click on as well. Now, this is a dust test, so mold toxins are airborne. We call those mold spores, and so they will be sprinkled around your home, your work environment. So on an ERMI or HERTSMI test, you literally take a dusting cloth and you dust the surfaces, you send that back into the lab, and about $200 later, you get a report back letting you know if you have an elevated number of mold spores in your home or your work environment. That would be an indication that there is mold exposure coming from somewhere. Again, this is not an all-inclusive test to say 100% yes, but it's something that you can use to look at and see if you have multiple risk factors for mold. Now, another one that you can do is immunolytics. At-home mold test. This is one that I actually did as well. I also did the ERMI test. And this one, you get these little Petri dishes. Again, it's around about $150, so under $200 for this one. You can test multiple different rooms in your home. You leave the Petri dishes out. They collect some of the mold spores, and then the mold grows back in the lab, and they can tell you what different types of species of mold that you have in your house. Now, one thing I want to caution you with in this one is that this test may come back negative for toxic mold. It may come back with things like candida or some other types of species, which again is what happened to me. It actually didn't come back with toxic or black mold. However, whenever you have any type of mold growing in your home, that means that you probably have dampness or something that's going on, and wherever there's dampness, there is a risk for other types of mold. So this can be a risk factor marker that you can use to look at again. Now, tests for your actual body to look at mold, there's 2 of them that you can do. Well, there's actually 3 of them, but 2 I'm going to talk about today. And one is a nasal swab. So when you're exposed to mold, one of the things that happens is you can develop bacteria and fungal overgrowth in the nasal passages and something called marcons. And marcons are developed based upon exposure to biotoxins or mold toxins. So oftentimes people that have mold exposure or that even have lupus or other kinds of conditions, they will have marcons in their nasal cavities. So this is a quick, easy swab that you can do. This test is about $87, $90 to $90. Send that in, you get your report back. Now again, I tested negative for marcons, but I had positive for other bacterial and yeast overgrowth in the nasal passages, which is an indicating factor for me. And then the last kind of test that I'll talk about today that you can do to look at your body specifically are blood markers that your doctor would actually have to order. And these would be called C4A, C3A, MSH, and then also something called TGF1, and then VGF. Now these look at how mold might be creating an inflammatory response in your body, and then how that is then affecting other systems of your body from functioning correctly. So hopefully with these you can get them covered by insurance if you can order those through your doctor. So I don't have a price point on those for you, but it's something to see if your doctor is willing to do, because that ultimately is going to tell you how your body is being affected by mold toxins. Now again, there is no all-in-one inclusive test that's going to be 100% positive and for sure for you. In order to understand if you are being impacted by mold, you need to have multiple correlating factors. And these multiple correlating factors would be things like knowing that there was water damage or a leak in your home or your work environment, having symptoms that indicate maybe mold toxicity, and then also maybe doing a couple of these different tests and having a couple of them come back positive. If you have 2 out of those 3 areas covered for positives, then mold is certainly a problem for you. So like I said with me, we had a known water damage or leak in our house. I was symptomatic, my hormones were a mess all over the place, and then I did some of these tests. I actually did every single one of them, that I talked about, and I had 2 of them come up positive out of the 3 or 4 that I did. So multiple correlating factors, and then we were able to put together a strategic plan to remove the mold, and ever since we removed our mold back in November, my body has been healing, it's been getting better, the hormone issues are back in balance, and I am in remission for Hashimoto's. So I hope this was helpful for you guys to give you a first step at how to start looking at mold, if mold toxicity is an issue for you. And next week in part 2, I'm going to be talking about, once you know that mold is an issue for you, what are some of the things that you should be doing in order to heal your body? How do you maybe start some type of healing plan that includes all the lifestyle factors and things that you can do in your home or your workplace? So I hope you guys found that helpful today. I'll see you next Thursday on the blog.